Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a newcomer into the temple, coming to us from the world of Flying Koala Publishers, which is currently crowdfunding this particular project on BackerKit, and the creator of both the Fermi resolution itself and the Worldbook TTRPG, which we'll be getting into, the one and only Mo Lane. How you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about myself and my stuff, and mostly myself.
Yeah. Do you walk into a room and say, "Allow myself to introduce myself"?
Yeah. I often look silly doing it, but you know, you miss the chances you don't take.
Yeah. Well, I'm pretty sure you can apply for a job at the Ministry of Silly Walks.
Yes. I did not quite see it in the original when it was coming out, but I did watch that stuff pretty extensively, even in the before YouTube era, which took some doing.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you get lucky and you get a sketch on PBS or something like that at like 11 o'clock at night.
I remember doing it on watching it on VHS. That's just surreal. The world has gotten remarkably more techy over the last 20 years, and nostalgia is all very nice, but I don't miss VHS one bit. Digital is lovely. Digital is what's the reason why I get to write. So
I'll bring that up and raise you one. I will be very happy if I never have to work with a Betamax ever again in my life.
Yeah, okay, fair. Never quite one of those. So
I had one, and it was a case of praying to the tech gods that it would actually work. So when we finally got it replaced with a proper VHS, we took the Betamax out in a very Office Space fashion.
That was exactly the scene I was wondering about.
Yeah. And for me, I ended up breaking a bat on that thing.
Well, probably deserved it.
Yeah. And...
yeah, I remember the days when, installing mice was an hour and a half detail. You had to find the drivers, and the drivers didn't work. And there are a lot of things to say. But things just get better. It work better now.
Yeah, and what I will always find especially funny regarding when people romanticize about old tech. I distinctly recall seeing an old ass article from way back in the day that talked about how the cotton gin was going to be a passing fad.
Yeah.
Or
you never know.
Or there was an article in, actually the best example is the infamous flying machines which cannot fly thing.
Yeah.
Which posited that it would take 1 million years for a legit flying machine to make a successful flight. 3 months after that thing was posted, the Wright brothers do the Kitty Hawk flyer flight.
Yeah. I was reading about that the other day. Apparently, the first president to ever take a trip on an airplane was Teddy Roosevelt. And he did it after he stopped being president. But there's a picture of him, and he's in one of those really early Wright brothers models, and he's such a player character. He really is.
Teddy Roosevelt was the main character.
Yeah. But yeah, if I was playing in a game in that era and I said I want to play somebody who is like the president of the United States, that's who I would have come up with. Just like down the line, including the things like having bears for as pets and stuff, or riding bull moose. He's just larger than life in a way that we don't see that often anymore. And I suppose it was probably tiring at the time, so maybe that's an advantage too. Sure.
My favorite of those kind of stories is the time he got shot in the middle of a speech and just went right along.
Yeah. You have to wonder how the assassin felt about that. I mean,
Um,
it's like Roosevelt didn't even care.
though there is though there is one case I can think of an assassination gone horribly wrong, and that is are you familiar at all with the original Cassius Clay? Not the man who would
Um,
later become Muhammad Ali, the one of the more infamous abolitionists in Whitehall, Kentucky.
I am familiar with the name, but I don't think I know this story.
Uh, he was a ardent abolitionist in it in his state. Had set up his own printing press for no other reason than to write anti-slavery articles, because nobody would publish him. So he's like, screw it, I'll publish myself.
Mm-hmm.
uh, but in one of his speeches, he uh, he ended up pissing off some people to the point where they hired an assassin from New Orleans, because no assassin in Kentucky would take the job, since he would challenge pro-slavery people to duels and win a lot of them. In fact, he won most of them. So it's like,
Right.
I'm not getting in a gunfight with a guy who's good at shooting people. Even worse after the whole Mexican War, and he became a bit of a war hero. So that added to the whole thing. But some guy from New Orleans decides to assassinate him, shoots him in the chest. It just happens to get deflected by the metal sheath for the Bowie knife that he carried on his person. So after getting knocked back, he decides, all right, time for payback, and goes after the guy. And probably would have beaten him to death if the assassin's associates didn't get him out of there and throw him into a river.
That actually reminds me of the story of the first assassination attempt against the president that happened like a couple decades earlier. Guy went up. He had two guns. He pulled out the first gun, pulled the trigger, and misfired. Pulled out the second gun, pulled the trigger, misfired. Now, that was part of his problem. The other part of the problem is the person he was trying to assassinate was Andrew Jackson, who was so infuriated with this that he took his cane and started beating the man to death, so his own guards had to drag the president off of, the would-be assassin before he killed him, because that's what Andrew Jackson loved to do. He loved to murder. He was like, he's single most personally murderous president. But they take the guns later and they test them, and they both fire. And one person on the internet said that clearly, like everything else in the universe at the time, the guns were too afraid of Andrew Jackson to actually, get his attention.
Pretty much. But the worst part about that case with not the worst, the best part with that case with the assassin with Clay. Yeah. After that assassin tries to sue Clay for causing mayhem, and loses because Clay brings his brother, and his defense is, this is just standard procedure for a Kentuckian.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And all, I'm pretty sure the judge's going, yeah, I had 3 duels myself this afternoon.
Well, given how common dueling was at that time, plus his brother happened to be one of the best lawyers in the state.
That's impressive. Kentucky had a lot of lawyers.
But I think what's all the more telling is Clay almost was Lincoln's running mate. The problem is Clay was too Clay.
Right.
As in Lincoln was concerned, look, I can't have you be my running mate. You're going to depopulate the entire district.
Well, yeah, I mean, fair. Oh,
So instead, he sent him off to be an American ambassador in Russia, which was there just to make sure Russia didn't support the Confederates.
well, you know, he did a good job because, as I recall, the Russians were like the only, like one of the few European countries that actually, was careful not to give any kind of encouragement to the Confederacy. I think they even visited San Francisco. The Russian fleet went to visit San Francisco, and that had caused a really big, um, kind of public support at the time.
Which, knowing what I know about the Imperial Russian Navy, it's a miracle they even got that far.
Well, there is that, yes.
Like, seriously, History of Everything has multi-hour-long videos going over the stupidity of the Russian Navy. Whether it be the Imperial Russian Navy, whether it be the Soviet Russian Navy, or the Russian Federation Navy. There is layers of incompetence. Along with one of the ugliest ship designs I've ever seen in my life.
Yeah. I mean, they make good guns, but
They make good guns for people who don't know how to people who don't know how to fix guns.
Fair.
But
let's not get in.
Yeah.
Let us not get into minutia of about firearms because we'll be here all night.
I can do that any day of the week, but obviously, yeah. So, one of the traditions around here, aside from the drinking, is opening with the humble beginnings, in a sense. So, walk me through your first introduction to role-playing games and what made it stick.
Well, that's actually interesting. I first realized about role-playing games when I was in grammar school. This is back in the late 70s, and some kids were playing D&D. And I was not permitted to play D&D by my parents. My parents, lovely people, but my mother was deep into that satanic panic kind of hysteria about D&D was magic, and you could cause it to cast spells and everything.
Yeah, that tracks.
So I never got to play D&D. But the thing I discovered when I was in high school is that I was not allowed to play D&D. My mother did not actually care if I played Rollmaster, Twilight 2000, Paranoia, Call of Cthulhu, Middle-earth role-playing, which is what I really started getting into. I mean, Middle-earth role-playing, the old Iron Crown Enterprise stuff, which was
the quote-unquote simplified version of Rollmaster, which it was technically.
Yeah. It was, and I did all the Space Master stuff, and I got sucked into Champions then, and then at some point I ended up in GURPS, and went down. Yeah, I mean, second, third edition stuff, great stuff. I mean, I made my bones on in the amateur fan space with Steve Jackson's games in Nomine, which is basically angels and demons fighting in the modern world, AK-47s. It was based off of a French game that was very sarcastic and very satirical. And then we Americans got the game, and we had more people who actually wanted to do gaming about religious stuff, actually thinking about all this. So I went down into that rabbit hole for like a decade. It's like, it was it's still my favorite gaming system. I mean, it's dead now. I have a bad habit of getting really into games that don't really exist anymore. And from then, I pretty much I do a lot of generic stuff that doesn't require any particular gaming system, and I did that for 20 years or so. Eventually, I had a Patreon. I put stuff up on there. I still do. And then I really got into doing the current system because of the pandemic. It was part of a stretch goal that I had for the Kickstarter for my first novels. It's based, and the game I've written is actually based off of my own novels. So my game book also doubles as sort of like a Bible for me. So I can use it to, when I don't remember things, I've written it down in the book so I can actually figure out, okay, this goes this here and this goes there.
Mhm.
So it all sort of blends from one side to the other. So a lot of I tell people who read my books but don't do gaming, that the World Book is going to be useful for them so they can figure out who everybody is, because my major fantasy work stretches about 1,000 years.
Yeah.
And I tell people who are interested in the game that once they're done with that, if they like the world, I have like five novels or short story collections and a bunch of stuff on the Patreon and stuff. So recommend that way.
Hmm. Now, if you don't mind, I'd like to throw a few classic names of role-playing games at you, and you can tell me if you played it, if you ran it, if you had certain experiences with it, so on. Think of it as a nerdy-ass Rorschach test.
Sure.
Star Frontiers.
Odd in the gaming magazines, never had the money to actually pick up the basic set.
All right. Traveler.
I started that one actually with GURPS. GURPS came up with a Traveler thing. I bought it all. I said, "Wow, this is awesome." I picked up a bunch of the reprints and stuff when they came available on various crowdfunding. Always wanted to play, never got. But by then I didn't have a good GURPS group, and I never got it. I never got to play it.
All right. Palaslanta.
I've seen it. I've never actually gotten a chance to play it, unfortunately.
I know a lot of people will bring up Marvel Phase Rip since you brought up Champions, but I will pivot and bring up DC Heroes.
DC, well, I was, as I said, I was a Champions person. DC Heroes, that was one of those where I would read all of it at the gaming store, because on the great Marvel DC bend, I'm a DC kid. I was not a Marvel kid. My wife is a Marvel person. I'm a DC person. So so my superhero gaming was mostly Champions, some GURP Supers. But I would have loved to do a Plastic Man character. That would probably have been my favorite superpower, and not because stretching is cool, though it is, but because Plastic Man is my single favorite DC superhero. Not sure why. He's just cool, and also lame at the same time, but lame in a cool way.
Mm-hmm. Gamma World.
I think I actually got to play a couple of sessions of that in college. I liked it, but and I did my post-apocalyptic stuff, and that Fermi Resolution is a post-apocalyptic game, was a little less mutated than that. And TSR, and that was a TSR game, right? And
yeah.
Yeah. And as I said, I got into TSR late. I mean, when I was 25 or 26, my mother found out I was playing it. She still gave me grief about that, and she didn't even believe in the satanic stuff anymore. But so I think I played a couple of times. It was at a convention or something,
Mm-hmm.
and it was fun. But back then, it was also the problem of finding people sane to play with.
Yeah.
And that could be fun. Your younger viewers have no idea how scary it could be in the late 80s and mid 90s.
Yeah. I was born in '87, but I'm well aware of how difficult it was to get a group together, and I ended up becoming the forever GM personally because the person who was organizing the groups was me. I did have a LGS that was kind enough to lend me a spare room at sometimes.
That's nice.
Especially when Free RPG Day became a thing, and we took advantage of that. Even though people ended up learning very quickly to not question the GMing decisions of somebody when they're a foot taller than everyone else.
Yeah.
That and if somebody got caught cheating, they'd have to drink the pain glass. which is a
What was in the
water, salt, sea salt, pepper, black pepper, Tabasco sauce, tiger sauce, Frank's Red Hot sauce, sriracha more recently, and 1 drop of Da Bomb. As the name implies, it is designed to inflict pain.
there? Trying to think, but now I'm trying to think of what booze you would put that in that to to make that work.
You'd probably just make a fireball with extra steps.
Yeah.
The unholy
Yeah,
combination
okay.
between a fireball and a Bloody Mary. Which, for legal purposes, I have to state, I do not endorse anyone mixing those kind of drinks. If you do that, I take no responsibility for what happens to you, your liver, or your colon.
Yeah, as Larry Niven says, think of it as evolution in action.
Yeah, I could go with that. But, I suppose Zane, I was going to bring up Hero System, but since you brought up Champions, that would be kind of redundant.
Yeah.
But shifting away from that, the Fermi resolution is a series of stories and short stories that you've written on for a while. And was it a case where you had a story in mind first and then built a world around it, or you had a world that you built and built a story around it?
It was generally, I think the first one I actually wrote isn't my first novel. It was a short story that was set in a world where I basically said, all right, I want orcs. I want them to be Roman orcs. And I want them to be real Roman orcs, like, legionary orcs, because Julius Caesar would have loved those guys.
Does that include the Roman handshake?
Roman handshake, the Roman, they have the names, they have their gens, they have their pronomens, they do the entire rank thing. And I said, okay. Now I am agnostic on the evil races / non-evil races paradigm that goes through for gaming. I'm cool with people who want to have savage races like orcs and goblins and stuff. And they're just there to be villains and stuff. It gives you something that you don't feel bad about attacking. And I'm also cool with they're all people and so forth. So I said, all right, I want them to be Roman orcs. Maybe I want them to be Roman Catholic orcs. And I said, well, okay, what happened to the Romans in their original history? They got converted. So I wrote this entire story about my viewpoint character. She was a centurion. She was a secret Christian. She had a bunch of priests that had been captured from the other side, and she was going to go break them out and the rest of it. And I wrote the first version of it, and it wasn't that great. But, it was good enough that I was able to work with it and eventually put it on my Patreon and stuff. And I said, that was kind of fun. I like that world. And I also want to do a short story about a post-apocalyptic magical world. And this later became Frozen Dreams. And I said, well, I also want to make it a pulp detective story. I wanted to write, sort of like the Garrett Files by Glenn Cook. Or, the magical mystery stories like the Lord Darcy series by Randall Garrett. And I wrote that, and I wrote it as a short story. And I'm looking at him going, oh, this was really compressed the way I had written it, because I'd written it like a 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 word short story. And I said, this could actually be like a novel.
Mm-hmm.
And I started writing it as a novel. And I used, back when I was still doing NaNoWriMo, I used NaNoWriMo as an opportunity to actually write out the novel version of it. And then I said, well, okay, I need to spend a couple of years getting enough money together to find an editor and to find artwork and the rest of it. And that will take me some time. And it'll take me time to to get it ready, because I don't have much time because I got 2 kids. And then the pandemic hit, and suddenly I had nothing but free time, because my 2 kids were home. They were doing their classwork remotely, and I had the entire living room set up so that It was like we had 3 computers because I was watching over them, and I'd make sure that they had their cameras on and they were paying attention. But I couldn't stand over them. So I said, all right, let me take this opportunity to just really work on the writing in the books. And then I did a Kickstarter for the first book, and that did a lot better than I expected it would. And I've been using that kind of momentum to write the books ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So right now I have 3 novels. Fourth one is in the 2/3 finished stage. A couple of collection of short stories, a completely different novel for a completely different series. And I've got a list of books that I'm going to be writing after I'm done with the current one that I'm working on now.
Yeah. But even with that, I think it would be safe to assume that one doesn't necessarily need that, but the novels in order to get into the Fermi resolution Worldbook itself.
Oh no, absolutely not. I made the concept itself is I tried my best to make it as straightforward as possible. I basically have set the universe, the game world, campaign world has been set at the end, the kind of end of the future history instead of the beginning. And it's basically, the year is, it's the 31st century AD. Humanity had a magical disaster in 2100 AD, long after I'm dead, and nobody's ever going to be able to call me on it. And the principle of it is, what happened is, at that time period, someone discovered the laws of magic, figured out how it's alternate physics. They figured out how to use it, and then some idiot put it into an app and downloaded it to everybody's phone. And then civilization promptly collapsed because suddenly all these people had access to things like curses, and everybody hates something, like electricity, cars, roads, and the civilization pretty much collapsed right then and there, which had to happen because I'm writing adventure stories, and you can't, and so I need to have a technological fall. It's not a grimdark series because I don't like, actually, I mean, okay, I do like grimdark. I just didn't like it for this. So
It sounds like the mindset you had was, just because it's post-apocalypse doesn't mean it has to be has to be Stalker or Metro 2033, which, don't get me wrong, those are great, but I can get that vibe of not wanting to do things a certain way because of some tradition.
Right. Yeah, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm actually, for the Bard of the Backer Kit, it's funny because I'm doing a collaboration with another post-apocalyptic game called Lead and Chrome.
Yeah,
and that
I've interviewed the guy behind that last month.
And that looks like a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to getting that one because, Mad Max with mutants sounds awesome. I love post-apocalyptic Mad Max stuff. But for this one, what I wanted to do was I wanted to have it be, it's a kind of curious stasis, which I actually have accounted for. I will get into it in later stories that people believe. But it's just basically, in this world, we have a evil empire which is in the last throes of collapsing in the middle of the continent. And everyone around them has been trying to get rid of them for the last couple of centuries, and it looks like it's about to happen. And they're all still in the, oh yes, we're going to destroy the horrible universal dominion, without once thinking what's going to happen when it's gone. Because all of these countries, they all have different opinions about how the world goes. They all have different desires. And I think that's a good opportunity for gaming. And it gives you something to consider. And I put it at the end of the series instead of the beginning, because that way I could trace the history of it. Because I knew as soon as I started writing short stories for this that I wasn't going to be staying in one particular historical era of it. So I needed to be able to keep track of everybody and everything, and also write down ideas so that I could use them later when I was writing more short stories. And it's mostly actually an investigative game. It uses the Gumshoe rules from Pelgrane Press, and what Gumshoe does is it is a game that is designed from the ground up, where investigation and mystery solving is the primary focus of the game. sort of have like in a lot of games, it's combat and magic
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like social interaction and or like investigation is just like abstracted with like die rolls and so forth. What Gumshoe does is it puts it on its ear, like where the primary goal is to give you all the tools to run an investigative game, and to set up things so that you never have a situation where you have to spend a half hour trying to get the players to come up with an alternate way to get the information they need because they made a critical failure on a skill roll to get a clue. Like that's anathema to the game. It abstracts away things like, well, do I have this item? Well, if you have a rating of a particular thing, preparedness, yes, you have the item. That could be whatever you want. You just need to spend points on it. Combat is treated as like, kind of abstractly quickly. You can get through the combat quickly because that's not why people are there mostly. Now, some of the Gumshoe games, like, are very much more combat oriented. Swords of the Serpentine, for example, is pretty much a combat game, like based off of Vancian and Conan-esque type magic and
Sorcery.
Yeah, and it's a fun game. Like I know both of the people who wrote it, and it's a great game. I'm actually a playtester for it. But for this, I wanted to have it be try to allow people to mess around with magic and mess around with investigating all the artifacts of the old Americans, and just generally hang and and have fun with a world that is both far future and also kind of fantasy medieval. I don't know if you showed the cover of the game, but
yes.
It tells you everything you need to know about this game. It's obviously based off of the old D&D cover about them looting an idol, but all the fantasy races, and that's all deliberate because because it's set in the future. People started creating new sapient races and stuff. They went for their historical past, which means they deliberately were trying to create elves and orcs and hobbits and and the rest of it. Sorry, halflings. You can't call them hobbits.
Well, you legally distinct, obviously, but
yeah.
Given now, since you brought up that old looting an idol image, I would be curious what sort of media you would put in the Appendix N for the Fermi resolution. Whether it be other books, whether it be films, whether it be video or tabletop games. What would some of the inspirational stuff that would be in the Appendix N be for the Fermi resolution?
Well, definitely to start off with, Randall Garrett, his Lord Darcy series, and the Garrett Files by Glenn Cook. A lot of Glenn Cook. I read a lot of those books growing up, and they were definitely a seminal influence on me. I would also put in a bunch of the actual, pulp detective stories and movies and stuff, or books because there is a lot of two of my novels, Frozen Dreams and its sequel Tinsel Rain, are very much in the pulp tradition, but they're also in the pop culture tradition. I came up on the conceit for them that that the people of New California pretty much worship pop culture. I mean, kind of literally. So I can make any amounts of bad jokes about movies that I want, and it works perfectly fine. I would also, in terms of films, I would say that some this one may be a little bit obscure, but there was a old HBO couple of movies one was called Cast a Deadly Spell, starring Fred Ward, which is set in a 1940s Hollywood, California, where magic exists and everyone uses it, and it's kind of about the great old ones and Call of Cthulhu, and it's also about magical technology and so forth. So Heinlein's Magic Incorporated, or Poul Anderson's Operation Chaos and its sequels, were also important to me. Generally speaking, I like things that mix magic and technology. So any kind of book, and so if I've read fantasy, I can even say nice things about the first couple of Piers Anthony's incarnations of immortality before the series went to hell.
Mhm.
That could be kind of fun. Or the case of the toxic spell dump from Harry Turtledove. That would be a really big influence, because that one is very much a high inertia world where it looks a lot like ours, despite the fact that it's got tons and tons of magic. In terms of games, I would have to say GURPS, because it makes it easy for it's a gaming system and rather than the gaming worlds. One of the things that I did always like, but I never got to play, was the original Castle Falkenstein.
Mhm.
By Telorsian Games, and that one was very much a fantasy kind of steampunky version of the 19th century with magic and weird tech and the rest of it. And that would also be something that that I had that had an influence on me, because I never, as I said, never played it, but I was able to track down all the books because I was working in New York City at the time, and I was able to get to the Complete Strategist on a regular basis. And that is that place in the 1990s was the holy land, or the promised land for for gamers, because it had everything and they didn't know what was in there. So you had to go diving and looking, and you would find things. I swear to God, the stock moved around when we weren't looking.
If I was
Other than
running that
that,
place, I'd probably be moving stuff from like a hidden wall just to mess with people.
and you'd be forgiven, because that's like ultimate geek cred back then, was working that place, because it had everything. Anime. Let's see. What else would there animated? I can't think of anything off the top of my head for animation. I do remember. I mean, I was kind of annoyed that Atlantis and Treasure Planet weren't better, because that would have been, if they had just been better movies, that would have been totally my jam. But that's the sort of thing I also I would also like. I'm in favor of, when I guess when I'm thinking of the stuff that I would put in the appendix N, I am not so much in favor of things that make fun of material that I don't like things that that mock the material that they're based off of. I like things like Galaxy Quest, for example, because it is in fact making fun of Star Trek, but it's making fun of Star Trek the way that a lover would. Because they are perfectly, because it's perfectly in tune with what the show was trying to do, to the point where the casts of the various Star Trek movies have all said, yeah, this is actually, if you want to put this into the canon so that it makes the even numbered Star Trek movies not are good, work again, we're cool with that.
Yeah. When it comes to that whole parody spoof thing, I've always talked about how the big important part is you have to be, in order to effectively make fun of something like that, and a lot of comedians will say this, you have to be a fan of that material. I think one of the earliest big examples of that kind of thing is Discworld.
Oh yes, absolutely, Discworld. I don't know why I didn't say Discworld. Discworld, it's genius.
Like, so much of Discworld is not just taking the piss on fantasy tropes, but taking the piss on British humor at the time, as well as taking the piss on mythologies, and sometimes directly making fun of certain writers. Like The Color of Magic was Pratchett making fun of Jack Vance.
Yeah, and also one of the fascinating things about Pratchett is that he was a stone cold folklorist.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the stuff that you read and you go, that's ridiculous, he actually pulled out of actual British or European folklore, and you just didn't realize it because it sounded because the most outlandish stuff a lot of times is the stuff that works the best. or is like the most accurate or the most historical. But yeah, Pratchett obviously would be big on Appendix N. He was like he was one of the finest fantasy writers of the 20th century. I miss him every day, and
I've spoken at length about how much I've enjoyed his version of Death.
oh yeah. I mean, you really, 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 really want to hope that that's the one that shows up. I won't feel bad if that's the one that shows up.
That, and
Okay.
I have been bullying everybody I can to add Hogfather Knight into the Christmas canon. Like most people, they'll show the Grinch or something around Christmas time. No, I'm showing Hogfather Knight. If we can bully the universe into getting Die Hard into the Christmas canon, we should be able to do that with that thing.
The BBC special, right? I have that.
Yeah.
It's marvelous.
And I do have to ruin it by the fact that the voice of Death in that is the same guy in the Grey Poupon ads.
No, that doesn't ruin it. That like, I play video games. I'm used to hearing like people that I like. What's his name? Oh God, he was Herbert West in Reanimator.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know who you're talking about.
He did like I one of the video games that I play is called Secret World Legends, which is pretty much an occult TTR
I'm familiar
MMORPG.
Yeah, I'm familiar with
Secret
World. Both the original Legends and the TTRPG by using the Savage Worlds system. I talked about that last month.
Yeah, I actually put my character in the original game as a Christmas present to me, because like I figured immortality. He like when he showed up as one of the voice actors, it drove me nuts for a week until I figured out who he was, and then I realized he was in everything. Jeffrey Toombs? No, that's not right. Anyway, but so actually, also Secret World Legends would also be in my my Appendix N, because I love the fact that it just basically accepts that every conspiracy theory and legend encrypted is real and just fits it in somewhere. And like makes it kind of work well.
Yeah. And with that in mind, I wonder if the Fermi resolution could be considered a post-apocalypse.
In a lot of ways, it is. The first, I mean, actually, I've actually been thinking about that myself. To give you an example, the book Morgan Barad, which is basically a Conan-esque type romp through where I destroy large parts of Monmouth County, New Jersey, because that's where I grew up. That one is explicitly post-apocalyptic, because he wakes up, the country has fallen apart. He has just between you and me, this would be a heroic trilogy, except that those are no longer acceptable in polite society these days, and probably will stay that way until after George R. R. Martin dies of old age. So, I mean, it's a standalone novel. I will probably come back to it someday, but that one is post-apocalyptic. By the time you get to the actual world itself, like the game world of the 31st century, it is post-apocalyptic. They have resolved a lot of the stuff that that they are working to get rid of the last vestige of the thing that's holding back the rest of the continent. They would like to get their guns back, and electricity, and like decent roads, and mechanical engineering and the rest of it. But they can't, because they've got this horrible magical archmage realm in the middle that's just messing everything up for them. Or so they think. I mean, when it's gone, they're no longer going to have that excuse, and they're going to discover, a lot of these countries are going to discover that they may not completely agree on everything, especially since there's at least a couple of nations in there that pretty much consider themselves to be the United States of America. One country actually just calls itself that, and does not, and everyone else calls it the Second Republic because they don't really recognize its authority for the entire country over the entire continent. And it's never been an issue, but it probably will be an issue in about 10 years on the game world.
Yeah, and
they're not bad people. They're not bad people, but there will be conflict there. But it is very much a post-apocalyptic in a lot of ways, because people have stopped thinking in terms of just immediate survival, and they're now thinking about building and rebuilding and fixing and deciding that some things don't need to be fixed.
Yeah, and I will note, and I probably should have clarified where I drew the line between post-apocalypse and post-apocalypse. The general line is that with the latter, enough time has passed since the proverbial bomb being dropped, even if it wasn't a bomb, that new cultures, civilizations, and the like have started to spring up.
Yeah. I would say then that definition definitely fits the main world of the Fermi resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the old Americans, which is what they call them, loom over the imagination and consciousness of everyone in North America, much like the Roman Empire loomed over medieval Europe for 1,000 years. Mm-hmm. And this that actually insight is from something like that actually draws on something like S.M. Stirling's Change series, which is also probably should be the Appendix N, and that one is a world where high energy chemistry just disappeared one day, and then the entire population, like 99% of the population, died, especially the east and west coasts. And now they've got this very, very low magic fantasy world going on, and this was Steve's attempt to make sure that he could have plenty of room for adventures and and fighting and so forth. So, but in my world, there's considerably more magic, and also they are getting out from underneath the dead hand of the past that has been inflicted upon them. Because a lot of that is also they would like to have, as I said, they would like to have rockets and cars and guns again, but they've got this horrible magical empire in the center of the continent that's keeping them from doing that. So they are pretty much trying to, in a lot of ways, they are trying to get rid of the last vestiges of the apocalypse. And what they will do after that, I'm not going to really write any stories about after the fall of the evil empire. I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm probably not going to do any kind of adventure not modules for it either, because I figure that's something that people can figure out for themselves. Because the answer of what comes next, I'm not personally invested in writing that, and I don't want to step on anybody else who thinks, well, obviously this will happen or obviously that will happen. I want to give them opportunities to develop their own campaigns.
Mm-hmm. Which definitely makes sense. And with that in mind, when it comes to magic, that's one of the big elephants in the room that often has to be addressed when dealing with fantasy or fantasy adjacent kinds of settings. In this case, is magic something that is usable by players? Is it something that's commonplace? Is it something that's rare? How is magic working out?
I'm going to be honest. I cheated a lot by the nature of the game. Because what happens with Gumshoe is they abstract a lot. Mm-hmm. Basically, in the game, there are certain species that have innate power. And it's recommended, for example, there are things like ghoulben, which is pretty much Lovecraftian ghouls, only civilized, and they wear clothes. And they have a certain amount of a power attribute, which they usually use for healing and so forth. And you can be a mage, or pretty much the mages and clerics exist, and they use the same basic stat, power and so forth. But mages pull magical energy out of the universe, and then they use it to feel effects. while priests are pretty much I call them invokers, and they either invoke it from gods, including the Christian God, and never mind why it, there are several different gods and they all seem to be able to give power, or they get their power from invoking spirits, or they get their power from invoking demons, but nobody really admits to being a demonologist in this universe, because that's a good way to get yourself killed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, basically, the way it operates is because of the way the Gumshoe is set up, you don't have stats in it so much, and you don't have your physical attributes are pretty much up to you, however you want to be. They don't have things like attractiveness or fitness or whatever. Basically, you have abilities that give you pools and stuff. So what happens is that you use magic. You can use magic points to aid you with other skill tests, and then you just describe how it is that you did it. So if you're doing a adventuring check, which is most of the physical activities, you can say, well, I spent a couple points of my magic points. I take them from that pool to boost my roll, and then I say, oh, well, yeah, I cast a spell that allows me to jump a little bit farther. Or if they're doing a scuffling or fighting check, it's like, well, yeah, I use a bunch of magic points and I cast a fireball. It doesn't have any effect on the actual mechanical, aside from giving you pluses to your checks. So, but you're expected to use the flavor text to describe how it works. So, I generally I would have done this completely different if I had been using GURPS, for my magic system. And when I first came up with all this, I was thinking in terms of GURPS. GURPS does not have an open gaming license, and Gumshoe does. Mm-hmm. So I went with Gumshoe, and I found that doing it that way, it really does make a difference to how you conceptualize magic. It's one of those. This is not a game for people who want to crack the Grand Canyon further in half, or vaporize entire cities off of the map, or or teleport yourself to the moon. Mm-hmm. I'm not particularly sorry about that. This is and honestly, I don't actually care whether how it comes out, as long as people enjoy playing it. I've never been really, for this, I'm not really particularly concerned about hyper focusing balance. A lot of games you need to balance things very, very carefully, otherwise they'll fall apart. But for stuff like that, but for stuff when it's mostly an investigative and exploration game anyway, a lot of Gumshoe is really about resource management. Mm-hmm. And because what happens is you get points, and then you spend the points to get your rolls, boost your rolls, and then you don't have those points until the end of the adventure, or unless the GM decides he's going to refresh some of your pools. So if you spend a lot of points right away getting rid of for solving things and stuff, you're going to be up against in the final big bat or whatever, virtually drained. It's sort of like how you play Baldur's Gate, right?
Yeah.
Okay, you know how in Baldur's Gate you start to feel the pinch a little after you've had your second short rest, and the bard has done the Song of Rest, and you're going, do I need to do a long rest now to refresh my pool, to refresh all of my spells and stuff? It's sort of like that. You have to do a lot of resource management in the game, or it depends. The GM might decide to just give you plenty of refreshers, in which case you're going to be throwing around spells like nobody's business. But if that's what you want to do, I'm not anybody's mom or dad. Play the game how you want to play the game. You bought it. You can do whatever you like with it. Mm-hmm. So, and I don't want to make it sound like I think that other ways of handling this are bad, but it seemed to work out fairly well in playtest.
Yeah.
So,
what it sounds like is this is the approach that is tailor built for the kind of game that this is supposed to be. As opposed, essentially the difference between a sandbox and a theme park.
Yeah, it is there is sandboxing elements to it. Magic in the stories is mostly a matter of people pulling energy out of the universe, and sometimes they have to pull energy out of themselves, and they try not to do that too often because you end up with the ubiquitous nosebleeds, or like, or blacking out or whatever.
Mhm.
A lot of my characters don't actually use much magic in the stories themselves. And when they do use magic, it's usually very formalized because my in Morgan Barad, the main character, he knows he has magic, so he keeps trying to use it, and he keeps like burning him because he's channeling like the equivalent of electricity through his body, and he doesn't know how to do it properly. So after a couple of almost dying, he's become very careful about when he actually uses it, and he realizes this is why they have spells, because the spells control the magical energy so it doesn't kill anybody. Or kills people less often. And I also make a distinction a lot between wild magic and tamed magic, because wild magic can do anything, and it's usually doing it in a very kind of scary fashion. Because it's sort of, I think that might be sort of my attitude towards a lot of AI, is it looks like a spell. It's sort of like a spell, but it's operating under rules that you don't really understand, and it doesn't have any protections, so it's dangerous to mess with.
And if someone's not careful, can backfire on them, or cause them to
Absolutely.
suffer from a bad case of explosions.
Yes. Or the thaumaturgical equivalent of of third degree burns, or possibly even just third degree burns, because it's all physics. So this is just an energy source, and nobody says, "Hey, why don't I take the strong nuclear force and shove it through my fingertips?" And if you did that, if something weird happened to you and fatal, people would be going, "Well, that maybe you shouldn't shove the strong nuclear force through your fingertips."
Yeah, I think we've seen some people who've tried to do some equivalent of wild magic, and end up having their descriptors be there and over there,
Hmm.
which is a fancy way of saying that they're in pieces. Chunky salsa.
I mean, getting back to Pratchett, a lot of that is actually kind of Pratchettian. He once described magic as being the burning sword, the fiery sword that burns all the way to the pommel.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's power and it's energy, and if you don't understand it, it's dangerous.
Yeah. And of course, whenever that sort of power but dangerous is mentioned, I'm always thinking of the one time Death gave a kid a sword when he was portraying the Hogfather, which, for those unaware, the Hogfather is basically the setting equivalent of Santa.
Mm-hmm.
And when people were like, you can't give a child that, it's not safe. It's a sword. They're not meant to be safe. And called the whole thing educational, and to the answer of, what if she cuts herself? That will be an important lesson.
Yes, it will.
And technically speaking, with all of that, he isn't wrong. But even with the amount of powers that Death has in that setting, there's still rules that he has to follow, though he finds ways to bend those rules on occasion. I think one of the better ones is the whole thing with the matchstick girl.
Yes.
Bringing the matchstick girl back to life, and his assistant telling him, you're not allowed to do that. Like the Hogfather can.
And there was that one where he's supposed to gather the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse so they may all ride out, and he goes and he tracks down all the other horsemen of the apocalypse, and at first they don't want to do it, and then they all show up at and I forget which one this was. Might have been Thief of Time. I'm not sure. And they're all there famine, pestilence, war, and him. And the real bad guys, the auditors of reality, are going, fine, fine, yeah, go ahead and, ride out if you must for the apocalypse. And they all draw their weapons and they say, Death says, it never was written who we're riding out against. And the auditors are going, what? It's and one said, he asked us to figure out which side we were actually on. And so they all attack the auditors because essentially these characters, while they are all representatives of the bad things of humanity, or the bad aspects of being human, they are in point of fact human, and thus fundamentally on humanity's side, especially when they're dealing with with creatures that hate life because it's so messy and imprecise.
Yeah, and what's funny about that is I've mentioned this elsewhere. There's an interesting parallel when it comes to two particular organizations within the Discworld universe. That being the Auditors and the Elves. The Auditors represent the worst aspects of order. Where the Elves represent the worst aspects of chaos. And where Pratchett puts humanity is right in the middle.
Yeah. It's true.
But
whatever.
I do have to note when it comes to the part of putting spellcasting on an app, there was a bit of a missed opportunity for a joke.
Okay.
In the year 2100, spellcasting was put onto an app. This has made a lot of people unhappy and is largely considered a bad idea. Because as much as I get the Pratchett-esque vibe with some of the stuff we've talked about, I get just as much Douglas Adams.
I was upset with Douglas Adams earlier in my life because I didn't like the way that he he obviously didn't want to keep going on The Hitchhiker's Guide. But I cannot deny that The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and everything up to I think So Long and Thanks for All the Fish had a profound effect on the way I thought about science fiction and fantasy. I mean, the absurdity of the stuff that he was that he was just casually presenting. And the trick was that all the absurd stuff that he showed, the people involved did not realize it was absurd. It was just normal. It was just, okay, this is how it goes. This is how everything operates. Sure, you're spending a year dead for tax purposes. It makes perfect sense. No, it doesn't. But in that particular scene, it does make because it's screwy logic, but it's internally self-consistent logic. And I think that's one of the tricks to doing with comedy, especially in a science fiction or fantasy setting, is that you have to take things to their logical conclusions or their logical end games if you want it to be funny. Because I think it was actually in GURPS Traveler, they were discussing the difference between various types of human humor. And there's one species, the Zondani, who are basically human adjacent. And they don't understand, they have problems with regular human humor, like anything that makes fun of people. They don't understand why that's funny. But if you show them a picture of a guy sitting down at a table in a fancy restaurant, and guy walks up with one of those dishes, with the dome and stuff, and he opens it up and he shows a boot, the Zodani's going to laugh because they understand the humor of that. They were expecting something besides a boot. That is a boot. That is funny. It's surprising. So I think that the trick with humor is if you can, in a science fiction or fantasy setting, if you can go with the surprise, going with the things that people aren't expecting, it works better than the her, aren't these people stupid thing, which I think a lot of people try to do, especially in fantasy, because it's an easy way to get a laugh, but that's a hobby horse. Never mind me.
Yeah. But within that, given the large amount of possibility that there can be, and given the abstraction of using the Gumshoe engine.
Mhm.
Do you have plans in the book of putting in a few story seeds or the like that can be used as a kind of starting point for a given table when running this?
Well, I did actually take a bunch of vignettes that that will be that will end up in like the various sections. People have an idea of how this stuff operates. So, so there's a little bit about how people gather information, how people divide up what the division of labor is for people finding things. People going, well, we did this, so this must be it, and so forth. So, and I'm also going to be using various short stories as the basis of the adventures that I'm doing as stretch goals. So, and those are going to be the more investigative ones. And I've noticed actually, as I've gotten, as I worked on this gaming project, a lot of the stories that I've been writing for the Fermi resolution have become more naturally investigative stories rather than just standard, um, action adventure combat. I mean, still do those, but I've noticed that that my characters seem to be a little bit more willing to, or you're ready to to try to figure out mysteries and figuring out how to use the information they found as their advantage. So I think that it might be a chicken. I don't know whether it's a chicken or egg thing. I'm like, is it? Am I writing? Did I write this game as an investigative game because I wanted to write investigative stories, or am I writing more investigative stories because it's based off of what has become an investigative game? I mean, people buy them, people read them, so so I'm cool either way. But so I don't know if that answered your questions, though. So I'm sorry.
Yeah, and I can certainly get it. For me it's just a matter of when you have a lot of potential directions for a given setting.
Mhm.
The last thing the last thing I think anybody would want is yet another you all meet at a tavern kind of situation, if you catch my drift.
Right.
And I don't hate the idea of you all meet at a tavern kind of thing. I mean, I've run beer and pretzels games plenty of times over the years, but relying on that kind of thing is a symptom when there isn't a suggestion given for how to set up how the individual party members even know each other.
Right. I mean, I will admit to the cliche of in the vignettes, I did do deliberately, haha, you all meet in a tavern thing. One of the things that I did suggest is one of the factors of this game world is that there has been a war going on for a couple of centuries, and it's been a very long, it's curiously isolated war. Basically, the Grand Alliance, which is pretty much everybody who hates the Universal Dominion, have managed to set up a kind of like a buffer around it. Had kind of set up a buffer that kept it from expanding any further. They were pushing it back. The Alliance army was kind of self-perpetuating. It wasn't actually, it was sort of like trench warfare without without quite so much lice and rats and the rest of it. They were pretty much using this as a cordon sanitaire to keep the Dominion from interfering with everybody else, while pushing it back steadily, trying to minimize it because of because they didn't want to mess with it. Because they were afraid that if they messed with it, someone would do a doomsday spell, and then then the caldera under Yellowstone explodes or something, and then the entire place is everybody's screwed. So you would have situations where people were born in the Alliance military families, served their term, then retired. And I said a squad of these people, 5 or 6 of these people, would make an excellent adventuring party, because they would have worked with each other for for years. They'd know each other's what they were capable of and what they needed to do, and if they needed a particular specialist for something, they would know who to go get. So, or if you're like if you're in a place like where you're doing investigative like city stuff, you could be part of like a detective team, or part of the city guard or what have you. Or you can meet in a bar, because bars have like booze and tables like to put your plans on, and everybody knows where the tavern is.
So, if you're going to do the tavern, at least mix it up a bit, people. Like have a
Yeah.
worst tenor contest is the reason why you're all in this one dive bar.
There was I did actually do a short story that's in the latest collection, where it starts off in the Elflands, which is in the south, which is basically the southeast of the United States, and Waffle House Wendy had just been going on when I was writing the story. So I said, would Waffle House have survived the apocalypse? And when you say that aloud, obviously Waffle House would have survived the apocalypse as a corporate entity. Like, why is that even a question? So my viewpoint character, who is a privateer captain, he is in the Apofle Wafflero, which is which is close as I could get in Elvish to Waffle House, because Tolkien, for some reason, did not write the word waffle in any of his dictionaries. And that's where all the captains would get their food, and watch the bar fights and the rest of it. And that's where he gets recruited for his job, because the person who wants to hire him knows that's where you go. Just like in the 18th century, if you wanted to find people like businessmen and so forth, you went to the coffee house or the chocolate shop, because that's where all the businessmen hung out.
Mm-hmm.
So I like to use it for that when it makes logical sense. If they were all going to a tea house, then then you can set stuff in tea houses. If they all go to the gladiatorial games, then you would set it up there. Places where people are going to hang out in a world that doesn't have cell phones or email. But that's also the other.
In a world with the gladiatorial games, so Waffle House again.
Yeah, that pretty much. They had a cordon off place, and it was all very no weapons or anything. Nobody was getting killed, but this is a good place to see if you wanted to show that you were good in a brawl for a privateer captain. That's where you went, especially if you could also demonstrate you could cook. Multi-classing is very much a thing in this game.
Yeah. And even more so if you can parry flying chairs.
Yes. I which I believe I had the character do. With such grace, and she was hired on the spot, which pissed off our hero, because he was going to hire her himself, but he was eating his eggs and he lost his chance.
You lose. Oh,
very much.
So I suppose this kind of setting would be a perfect fit for one thing that I've used as a running gag of a magic item, and that is the up button.
What is the up button?
It is a rune trap that I made in my very early days playing D&D. You place it on solid ground. When someone steps on it, they go up about 40 miles an hour for 6 seconds, as if they had cast fly on themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And
then they fall.
Then they fall. And the thing is, I didn't put in any rules about what happens if they hit something. So imagine if somebody steps on it in a cave that's lined with adamantite, which doesn't budge for anything.
Right. Or I don't know. It would just plain limestone would also ruin your day. 40 miles an hour for 6 seconds. Mm-hmm. That's gonna hurt.
That's how we killed a dragon at the culmination of one campaign. It was in a cave lined with adamantite, and it got crushed because it's literally an unstoppable force versus an immovable object.
Yeah, when that happens, things splatter.
Yeah. We had to roll saves to avoid losing our lunches because a whole lot of chunky salsa.
Right.
But the big reason I say that is because I get the feeling that even with the dangers of magic, there's a bit of freeformness because it's just modifying the way skills work, and skills are already
Oh, yeah.
pretty abstract in Gumshoe.
That might also be a personal sentiment of mine. A lot of the GMing that I've been doing for the last decade or so, and this has fallen off massively since the pandemic. So I guess a lot of the GMing that I did in the 2010s and stuff was for convention games, and I love to run Madcap convention games. That's all I like. I figure you have 4 hours. We don't have time to get into the weeds on this. We don't have time to spend 20 minutes working out each combat round. We need to go to get maximum. And when you're doing Madcap, it's easier to have chaos and encourage people to do crazy things because it's funny or because it's cool, and just basically just keep on the pressure and just keep everybody just playing off of each other, going higher and higher until you hit the climax, and then then you tell me what cool thing you want to have happen. I throw it all together in narrative. Everyone says, "Oh, that was fun," and they go to the next game. So I think that might be the magic system. I think is kind of trying to encourage people to just here, there's your plus. Tell me what it does, and you don't have to remember it the next time, every time. You don't have to cast fireball the same way every time. You don't have to use your points. You can use your points to get rid of mud or to produce mud. What I care about is that you're that you're being creative with how you're describing things.
Mm-hmm.
And my style is not the one true style. But I did write the game, so so I suppose I did write the game to flatter my own particular play style. So hope that doesn't bother anyone.
No. Well, if that bothers them, they clearly picked the wrong show.
And,
Since...
well, I mean, anyone who buys the game, so I hope it doesn't bug them. But
well, at that you already said it before. You're not their dad.
Yeah, pretty much.
So by that point, it's a case of not not your problem. Yeah. But now, with that in mind, what are you shooting for as far as the page count for the Fermi Resolution Worldbook?
We have the advantage that I have here is that it's mostly got done ahead of time. So I think that we're looking at about 140 pages, I think. Let me see if I can track down the original. Okay, the calculations. Yeah, I think. I was assuming because it's being doing through drive-through RPG, they've got something that's 4 or 6 page modifying things. So I think I went with 144. And I calculated the cost per books based off of that, and what other people were doing. So it's not so it's going to be bigger than say Mark Borg, at the size of I think a old GURP Worldbook, not as big as it's it's not going to be as big as a basic set, especially something like Delta Green or Fall of Delta Green or or the new D&D. So, but I think that it's the idea is to have a decent amount of pages there, but nothing bloaty. So, I might end up it may end up the second edition may end up being bigger, but this is the first time I've actually done a full length RPG Worldbook. And a lot of the stuff that I've been interacting with people I've been interacting with who have been doing this, there is a certain amount of minimalism that has been sweeping through, the indie game space, if I want to be pretentious about it. So, as I said, about 144 pages. It might be a bit more. Hopefully, it won't be much less. So, and like, yeah, but that also, a lot of that also has to do with I'm not doing the layout for it. I am paying someone to do layout for it, and he is busily working on it right now. Uh, Now that he knows he's getting paid, so we will see. Now, if you go to the main main thing for the Fermi Resolution Worldbook, and let me see, let me go down here. If you go to the main page of it, people who are interested in this can actually, I have actually made the 0.80 version of it, the not for non-commercial use. This is a book that does not have the edits in it, the final edits in it. This is a book that does not have the added bits to it that I wrote for, like, for the commercial version. It doesn't have all the art in it, but it does have the basic gist of it, and I've made that available for people to look at via Dropbox. You can see the 0.8 version for free if you go down to the main page and you go down to the link where you're talking about the paragraph that starts, "The days haven't been unproductive, mind you." And the link is, it's a pretty book already, and I think it's a pretty book already. And people can take a look at that, and there will be things added to it, and also it will be cleaned up with a table of contents, a better character sheet, because the character sheet on that was just very bare bones, and various widows and orphans in the layout and the text being removed. I had to check for typos and the rest of it. So, but you never get all the typos. Never ever get all the typos. Frustrating. So people will be able to take a look. And I encourage people to look at it before they buy anything or they back anything, because I feel the book stands on its own. And if you don't like it, there are plenty of games out there in the universe that will be better if they're better suited for a particular person's game style or their mindset or the way they like to play. I encourage people to just game.
Okay.
I want them to game with buying my stuff, but but it does not hurt me if people buy other people's stuff, because this is not a zero-sum game.
Of course.
You know what I mean?
I will certainly be looking forward to seeing how it develops with time. But
Thank you.
With that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my monastery and enjoy the madness that happens around here.
Well, serenity is where you find it. And honestly, I'm just happy to talk about the game. I'm happy to answer questions about it. And I'm kind of happy to hear myself talk. It's a shame. So I hope that I've answered all of your questions helpfully. And if you have anything further, if you want to ask any questions further, I guess you can just email me or something. But
Oh yeah.
But if people are actually the obligatory plug, if people are actually interested in more of my stuff, particularly the fictional stuff, I'm sorry I got to do the plug. My personal website is www.molane.com, and I also do have a Patreon, and it is at patreon.com/molane, and that is a place where this is the place where I do a lot of my short story. I do monthly short stories, and those short stories include things from the Fermi Resolution. It will most likely end up here first, and then I revise them a couple months or a year later and put them together as anthologies after, and I have an editor go through them and yell at me about my use of semicolons, because apparently my use of semicolons is a war crime, which is whatever. Okay. But, sorry, long story, but you can find my stuff there. And obviously also you can find, the information about the Fermi Resolution Worldbook at my TTRPG. And also lastly, no, I'm not calling it X. My Twitter account is Ogiel, OGIEL 23. and that's where I basically pontificate on gaming and and put up all my links to whatever I'm writing or working on at the time. So
Mhm. Oh yeah. And with that said, of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there'll be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.
念念旧心体。